So I'm back in the game room, and this time around I'm not doing a pickups video. I'm not playing any video games. I've got the serious job of doing a collection video, and it's actually my first collection video, so I thought I'd do something a little bit special, something a bit close to me, something I've got connection to, and that is the Sega Titan video system. So what I'll do is actually go through my history, my connection with the system, and then give you some sort of tips and tricks, and then I'll go through the actual games I've got. So I've got about 22 games, something like that. So I'll go through them very quickly, don't worry. And then sort of go through my top 10, top 5, and then top game, which will probably be pretty obvious to you in about a minute's time when I start going through the history of it. So anyway, this is the system itself. This is the motherboard. So it's this is got a protective case I've got from 3 lines. So Sega STV, as you can see, the abbreviation is very unfortunate. I'm sure it was a practical joke on Sega of Americas, on Sega of Japan. But yeah, terrible abbreviation, but a fantastic system. So what is it? It's basically the arcade version of the Sega Saturn. I think they used it more as a sort of their low-end arcade hardware. So they used it not only for video games themselves, but also for things like redemption games, things like Whack-A-Mole or like Print Club. So if you ever went to an arcade in Asia, like Time Zone, then you would have seen loads of these little photo booths to take photos and get stickers, and things like Whack-A-Mole and things like that. That would have all used this kind of hardware. But enough of that. It is effectively a Sega Saturn. Let's not disguise the fact. In fact, you could almost say it's a pretentious Sega Saturn, couldn't you? So why would you collect for it if you could just get games on the Saturn? And in fact, the Sega Saturn's even better, isn't it? You've got CD, right? So you've got better music, you've got more options, you've got more cutscenes. Why would you do such a stupid thing and get games for this system? Well, it just goes back how I started collecting, to be honest with you. And the fact that I didn't actually have any connection with the Sega Saturn itself. I never had one growing up. So all I saw was those ugly videos of the games that they had at the time. You know, things like Croc, you know, these awful 3D games that looked terrible. And I never saw the 2D stuff. I never saw the wonderful shooters in Japan. I had no idea about that. Certainly not early on. It wasn't until much later that I got into that, and that's another rabbit hole for another day. But without having connection there, and then being more on the arcade side, so the arcades that pull me back into collecting, pull me back into games later on. So the MVS, and then from the MVS now I've also got some PCBs as well for the Super Gun, and the MVS to the Atomic Wave because it's SNK, and then the Atomic Wave to Naomi because they're pretty much the same machine. And once I was there, I was looking for the next machine, what was going to go into next. And one game in particular on the Naomi that really grabbed my attention, and I fell in love with this game, and I fell in love with the actual developer as well, and that is Ikaruga. Now, some people love it, some people hate it, people think it's overrated, but you cannot deny the fact that this is a beautiful shooter. It has a great mechanism with the chaining and the light dark system. You got to love this game, really. It is a little bit difficult, but there's many ways of playing it. But anyway, I fell in love with this game, and I fell in love with the game done by Treasure. I want to know more about their games, and especially their shooters. Now, if I was interested in the shooters, there's only one way I'm going to go from there, isn't it? And that is Radiant Silvergun. So I found out about Radiant Silvergun, and I really wanted to get that game. So there's a couple ways of getting this, and we're talking about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a bit more than that in fact. At that time, Radiant Silvergun was still a damn expensive game on the Sega Saturn, and in fact it was more expensive than on the STV. So I thought, I'm going to stick with my arcade, I'm going to go for the actual hardware, I'm going to pick it up that way. So altogether, to get the motherboard and to get the game, it comes to like maybe $300 US at the time. And it's kind of a lot of money, especially in those days when you can get so many games for that much money. A lot of games. So I was thinking to myself, you've got to be pretty serious to fork out that kind of money to get this game. You've got to show your appreciation for it. You've got to give something up. And for me, that was smoking. So I was really a heavy smoker at the time. I was over a pack a day. Started to feel really the poor effects, the health effects of smoking that much. So I said to myself, You know, you give up smoking, you prove your value, your worth, you give up one addiction for another, and then you can have that. You can have that game. So I did. I went cold turkey. After a couple of months later, I thought, okay, I'm going to get the game. Ordered the motherboard from Korea. It came with Die Hard. It came with Techno Football, and also I think it was Winter Heat as well. So I got 3 games straight off with the motherboard, and soon after that, the Radiant Silver Gun arrived from Japan, and yeah, I was so happy. And it worked, right? We're going 7-8 years later on. I've still given up smoking. There's a couple of times where I've gone off the wagon, like during the World Cup and things like that. I've had a few cigarettes now and then, and straight away I will kick it as soon as I get in my head, you're going to have to give up Radiant Silver Gun. Stopped immediately. So you could say this this system has actually saved my life, or certainly improved my health. So I have a lot to give to the Sega Titan system and to Radiant Silver Gun. So there's my boring story over and done with. There's my connection. That's why I didn't go for the Saturn. I went for the STV system. And if you actually wanted to go down this route and get this system, there's a couple of things you need to be aware. There's 2 motherboards, first of all. You've got the American one, which is this one. This is, I think it's the A, and the Japanese one, which is the B. This is the Japanese one. This is one without a case, but it does have all the extra stuff that came with Sega Sports Fishing 2. So you need stuff for the CD and stuff for that game. Hence you've got all this rubbish here. What else? It is a jammer game, so you can just work with a super gun. You just basically connect it in here to the jammer system. So either go straight into a candy cap, or it will work with a super gun. And then you need to know about what types of board for, whether it's A or B. If you want to get something like this will improve your sound, allow you to have the audio connector there, and also use a CPS2 kick harness, makes life easier. And what else about the system? Well, yep, the case, as I said before, is by 3 lines. You definitely want to get something like that. It looks pretty gorgeous and protects your motherboard. And the BIOS as well, you need to be aware of the BIOS. So this is an American system. It came with American BIOS, and in fact when I first plugged in Radiant Silver Gun, it blew my mind. It was like, what's going on here? It's not playing properly. It only gave me 3 of the weapons out of the 6. Totally confused me, and then I looked it up, and it's of course because the American BIOS, for some reason, it doesn't play properly. You need the Japanese BIOS, so you can basically burn a multi-BIOS. They're free. You can download it off the internet, and you can when it boots up, you can just choose which region you want to use. So that's good for languages. Not all games support all the languages, but there are some that are in English and Japanese. So that's pretty much it for the motherboard itself, and the actual games themselves. They're here. I've got a couple of examples here. They came normally in a kit, so very similar to MVS. I'm sure you've seen that. You've seen all these in the arcade. You've got the playing strip. Here's the wonderful game Golden Axe the Duel, which you'll see later. Yeah, you got something like that. You also got like dit switch settings, very similar to the MVS, just giving you the jammer layout and then what settings to put. And then some artwork for the actual arcade. So here is Guardian Force. Here's the example with the Golden Axe here. So the actual games themselves are not particularly interesting. They're very dirty grey cards. As you can see, dirty hardware from the arcades. Normally smell of cigarette smoke. And yeah, don't come with cases or anything like that, so you have to make it yourself. I haven't seen anyone online actually make them. I know the same place that do the shop boxes, I think South Town, they did have some sort of universal boxes, but I don't think they worked particularly well. They didn't fit properly, and they didn't really recommend it either, even though they do the artwork. So what I did anyway was VHS tapes, cassettes, boxes work perfectly. They fit really well, and the little notches as well, you just clip them out, and the notches on the side hold the game into place. I just use a bit of I've got like a little bit of foam, and it's absolutely perfect. Fits very snug, and I just changed the artwork to fit the VHS size. It works a treat. So I haven't got the artwork for all the games yet, and I need to get a better printer because yeah, they look okay, but they could be much better. They're the games, they're the boxes, and let's actually look at the collection of games. Let's see what I've got in my top 10 and what the top 5, and Yeah, right. You can't guess what my favourite game is, right? So let's take a look. So let's get the first two out the way quickly, and that is Sega's Sports Fishing 2. I don't even have the CD to play this one, it just came free with the PCB I showed you before. And the other is Sunsoft Shanghai The Great Wall, which is a pretty good Mahjong game, which I picked up on the cheap. Next up is a cool little puzzler, Sando R. It's actually a offshoot of the Bonanza Brothers. It's a lot of fun, lots of mini games in there, and especially fun if you've got a mate and have a few beers. Good fun all round. Another puzzle, but a lot less fun, is Ijon Tantai Jimuso. I have no idea how to pronounce that, but it's basically like a Where's Wally, but with Japanese symbols. Not recommended. Next up is another Columns game that Sega's released on their systems. This one's not too bad, it's Columns 97, you probably saw it on the Saturn, it's pretty common there. But there's two Columns games on the platform, this one and also there's a Sakura one which I don't have. Not much to say about this apart from it's cheap. Next is an absolutely belting puzzle game. It's Baku Baku Animal. It was released, I think, in all regions on the Sega Saturn, so it's easy to get hold of. I'd highly recommend you play this game if you like puzzle games. Very simple concept. You've got different food items and different animals that will just chomp away at the food. Really good fun, really well done. Definitely no shortages of puzzle games on the Sega STV. And next up is Compile's Puyo Puyo Sun. Everybody knows Puyo Puyo. Fantastic puzzle game. This one has the additional sun drop down item to allow additional chaining. Really good fun. Very cheap. Not sure if it made it to the West on the Sega Saturn, but definitely you can pick it very cheap on the Japanese version. Definitely recommended. Now we're into sports button mashing action with Decathlete. Definitely recommended if you like the track and field sort of games. This has a lot of charm. I was quite pleasantly surprised by this one. Also extremely cheap. Definitely pick it up if you've got a Sega STV. And if you've got a Saturn and you love track and field, grab this game. You'll love it. Pretty much in the same vein as Decathlete, you've got Winter Heat, which is just the winter sports variation of it. But I would say this one is slightly more interesting. Normally winter games do suffer, but this one actually has some quite fun games. I think the 3D works with it, especially with like luge and things like that. Definitely recommended. Again, cheap. Next up is the only footy game that made it onto the Sega STV, and that is Techno's World Cup 98. It's the sequel to 96, the one on the Neo Geo, and if you like Hat Trick Hero, if you like your Neo Geo sidekicks, then you will love this game. It has a really satisfying sliding tackle, which I love, and it's got a nice touch with some power-ups and special shots. You'll definitely enjoy this one. But I think it was arcade only. I didn't think it made it to the Sega Saturn. But on this STV, it's very cheap. Next up is All Japan Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua. Nice long title there for you. As on the tin is a wrestling game. I'm not a big wrestle game fan, but this one is actually not too bad. And the added bonus of having Virtual Fighters Jeffrey and Wolf, it's a nice touch. It plays pretty well for a wrestling game, I've got to say, and if you're a wrestling fan, then definitely get this one. I think it's pretty cheap on the Saturn, and it's certainly very cheap on the STV as well. That's the reason why I picked it up. Speaking of Virtual Fighters, you have Virtual Fighters Kids. I think everyone's pretty much played this on the Saturn. Very cute fighting game. I think it works really well on the Saturn or stroke STV. The other Virtual Fighters don't work too well, so this is probably actually the better one. You'll see in a bit. But definitely recommended, and also very cheap on the Sega STV. And this is the other Virtual Fighter game. This is Virtual Fighter Remix. Not my favourite game to say the least. I think everybody already knows this from the Saturn. Very floaty mechanics. Yeah, not a great game. To be honest with you, I think the Sega Saturn stroke STV really suffered when it came to 3D fighting games. I think it's fantastic when it comes to the 2D ones. You know, the CPS2 fighters are amazing on it. But 3D, not so much. I think it's probably why Capcom moved to the Sony platform for their 3D fighters in the arcade. Okay, hopefully I haven't upset the Virtua fans too much. I'll move on to the golf now. So this is another one that's on the Saturn. It's a very common game, and it's probably much better on the Saturn as well because of the fact you've got CD music and probably you've got more cutscenes as well. But it's a very cheap game on the STV, and it's a fun game nevertheless. Not as good as Turf Masters, obviously. Next up is another sports title, but something a little bit different. It is Funky Headboxes. Now this is extremely gimmicky and very quirky, as you can see by the footage. You've got these blockhead characters with very amusing faces, very amusing effects. Gets a little bit boring after time. Playability wise, it's okay. Probably best if you play it with a friend. I think it works better in the arcade than I can imagine on the actual Saturn at home. It did get released in Japan. And I don't know how expensive it is on the Saturn, but the STV version is not particularly expensive. Recommended to get, but not one of the best games on the system. Now get ready to arrive at Disappointment City because you've got Final Fight Revenge by Capcom. It really hurts me to slag off a Capcom game, but I've really got no choice. It was released in 1999 and it was one of the later releases on the Sega STV. And you expected more by this time. You know, you've got Capcom, the masses of fighting games, they've got such good material to work with. Yeah, it was a failure. Graphically, it's not so bad, it's just the playability, unfortunately. I don't know if they had problems programming on the STV, or it wasn't powerful enough to do 3D fighting games. But if you look what else was released at the same time by Capcom, Rival Schools on the ZN2 hardware of Sony, and that is fantastic, and I'm absolutely sure this would have been too if it was on that platform. Staying with disappointments, we have got Golden Axe the Duel. Exactly the same things as I said about Final Fight Revenge, you can say the same about this game. Graphically, it's not as bad as they say, but playability, it is. It's terrible. It did get released on the Saturn in the West, unlike Final Fight that was only in Japan, so you can play this one quite easily if you want. You certainly don't want to be picking up the STV version, it's far too expensive for what it is. This is not a good game. Next up is another 3D fighter, and it is Elandore, the Legend of Dragon. Now this one is a kind of interesting game because it mixes up 3D fighting with dragons. So if you can imagine Psychic Force meets Game of Thrones, then you got this game. Now it is kind of interesting, but it is more of a gimmick game. The same sort of concept is done far better in a different game, which we will see later on. Now this one is kind of expensive on the STV, but it is available on the Saturn in Japan, so if you really want to play this, you can. But I would definitely say try this out on emulation first, see if it's your kind of cup of tea. There is far much better games coming up. Next up is another fighter, this time by Data East. They put their hat in the ring with the Outlaws of the Lost Dynasty. Now this one is actually a weapons-based fighter, and it's set in the sort of Dynasty Warriors era. It's kind of fun, you know what you're going to get with this kind of game. Some quite varied characters to choose from. The playability is fairly smooth, much better than Golden Axe and Final Fight. So I highly recommend you play this one, it's a lot of fun. And you can pick this up really cheap on the Saturn. The Japanese version is very, very reasonably priced. Now we've actually reached the top 10 of games, and first up is a game by Capcom and Cave, and no, it's not a shooter. The Dream Team are together to make a snowboarding game, and it is Steep Slope Sliders. There's not a lot to say about this one. The graphics haven't particularly aged that well, as you can see, and it's a lot of fun though, a lot of fun. So I do enjoy my snowboarding games. So that's why it's in my top 10. So if you're like me and you enjoy these kind of games, I highly recommend you pick this up on the Sega Saturn. And just a heads up, if you are venturing into getting this on the STV, you have to tweak the settings slightly to get it to work. Next up is an Atlas game, and it is actually our first trip into the Power Instinct world, and it is Princess Clara. I'm not going to give the Japanese name, not this time, it's a bit difficult, but this is a really fun isometric shooter of all things. A little bit short, but definitely a lot of fun. It actually reminds me a lot of a game on the PC Engine called Martian Maze, or better known as that Namco game with Alice in Wonderland on the cover. It's a really simple shooter. You choose one character from 3 that slightly varies on the way they power up. And once you get used to the isometric view, it's a lot of fun. But like I said, it is really short and there's not much replay value. Now this can be very pricey as a Saturn game and also as a Sega STV game. So not really good value for money here. But maybe an emulation, give it a go, see what you think. It is a lot of fun. But like I said, it's short. It's a short game. Next one in my top 10 is one probably everybody expected, and it is Dynamite Decker or Die Hard Arcade. Actually one of the first games I even played on this Sega STV. It came with the motherboard. It's an absolute classic and one game I go back to time and time again. It's probably one of my most requested games as well, so when you've got friends come around they always want to play this one, have a playthrough over a couple of beers. It's a fantastically fun game. I think most of you out there have played this already, so there's no point going into the details of the game. And if you've got a Saturn and you don't own it, why not? This has to be on your pickup lists. Such a great game. And if you're collecting for the STV, this is one you're bound to come across. It's really common. It was in most arcades back in the day in the States. It's a very common game. Next we are back to fighting games, we are back to Atlas, and we are back to Power Instinct with Groove on Fight, or Power Instinct 3. So the Power Instinct universe confuses the hell out of me. So this is the 3rd game, but it's set in the future, so it is actually before Macho Melee, but no, really it's after, if that makes sense. But who cares about the history? This is a fighting game. And an absolute classic one at that too. If you like Power Instinct, you're going to love this. Okay, it's not as good as Macho Melee, but it is a damn good tag team fighting game. I just love the 2D hand-drawn, gritty graphics. And yes, 2D. This is where the Saturn STV absolutely excels. Either it's the hardware or it's the fact that they know how to properly program for this platform and they just can't do it with 3D. Like the other games in the Power Instinct series, I just love the wacky, cool characters you get to choose from. And this has got a completely new lineup because it's set in the future, but of course Princess Clara is there in the form of her daughter. She plays the same way, but she is so-called different. Okay, it's not the most balanced of fighters and you ain't going to play in tournaments with this, but it's just a hell of a lot of fun and you've got to play it. So the next game, I feel so sorry for. It really could make my top 5. It just didn't this time. Such a shame. It's Guardian Force. This is a fantastic tank shooter by Success and it's actually a vertical shooter but in a horizontal frame. You actually notice this on a couple of the shooters actually for the Sega ST. That's why they port so well to the home console, because they are designed that way and they don't need to flip it from a vert to horizontal. Where this shooter really stands out is its firing mechanism. So you actually fire in one direction with your smaller weapon, but your main turret you actually rotate round so you can fire all around the screen, which is absolutely vital because of the way the layout of the screen works and the way the direction the enemies will actually come onto the screen. Developers have also been quite inventive as well with some of the weapons. I especially like this disky thing that you fly around. It's a really cool weapon to use, very satisfying. This game not getting in the top 5 just shows you the caliber of the games to come. You've just got to play this game. If you can't get the Saturn version, then just emulate it. Do yourself a favor, play this game. So now we are really truly at the business end of the list, and first up is a fighter and it's Astro Superstars. What a game. This is a fighter by Sunsoft and it's actually the spiritual successor to the mighty Waku Waku 7 on the Neo Geo. If you know anything about Waku Waku 7, then you know this fighter is going to be extraordinary. It's not going to be a run-of-the-mill fighter for sure. While Waku Waku 7, the characters were firmly on the ground, this one, it's an aerial fighter, very similar to what we saw with Elan Dori, but this time we've got 2D, and this time it actually works. I think we're seeing a pattern here. The ability to fly up, above and below your opponent and even behind makes the game really fast paced and interesting. Not only that, mix in the fact your characters are really different, some with long distance attacks and some with really powerful punches. It really mixes up the gameplay. There's also an added heat up and cool down option before the beginning of the fight, which depending on what you answer will actually make your opponent more aggressive or more calm. It's a really cool little feature. So if you like your wacky and strange fighters, this is the game for you. It's absolutely fantastic, but it is expensive, so you may want to emulate this one. Next up is a shooter by Rising, and it is Sokuyu Gurentai. This game came out in 1996, which is an absolute golden age for Rising and shooters. They have battled Gurega during this time, and they'll soon bring out Armed Police Batrider and the sequel to Gurega, Backraid. Well, they weren't messing around. Like Guardian Force, it is a vertical shooter but in a horizontal layout, so this ports absolutely perfectly to the home consoles such as the Saturn or also the PS1. The graphics are absolutely stunning, the gameplay is amazing, the level design is fantastic, the weapons are interesting, there is so much to love about this game. The more I talk about the game, the more I wonder why it's not higher on the list. But believe me, there are some better games to come. It's hard to believe, but it's true. But please play this game. It's not so expensive on the Sega Saturn. I'm not sure about the PlayStation 1, but you have to play this game if you love shooters. You've just got to. Seems everywhere you look these days, there is cotton everywhere. There's remakes, reboots, special editions. God knows how many different games there are. And this is the best one, it's Cotton Boomerang. Unfortunately, on the Switch, it didn't get a good port, but the original is absolutely amazing. Again, you've got some fantastic, gorgeous 2D graphics. The gameplay is absolutely spot on. I love the two-player action on it, and I also like the way you can do a bit of a tag team on your characters, having 3 different characters. It's so much fun, and it's better than Cotton 2. To be honest, I haven't played the Switch version, so I don't know how laggy it is, but even if it's slightly laggy, this would still be a great game to play on the Switch. You have to play this some way or another. Fortunately, the Saturn version is incredibly expensive, so is the STV version, unfortunately. So please find a way to play it, whether it's Switch or emulation. The second spot goes to Shinru or Purple Dragon. This is by Washi and it's an absolute classic game. It's a vertical shooter and everything about it is just pure class. Now Washi didn't actually do many games. They had this one and also they had Trigger Heart Excelsior on the Dreamcast stroke Naomi. But what great shooters they are. It plays like a real classic shooter like Tatsujin or Batsu Gun, and the graphics are absolutely astounding. There's nothing too special when it comes to the mechanics or the weapons. You've seen it all before, but it's just mastered and polished. You can see by the footage, the graphics is just stunning. The gameplay, it just flows smooth. It's just a fantastic game. It's just a classic, fantastic shooter. It kind of feels like a blend of Raiden and Tatsujin, and that's a really good thing. And some people do complain about the checkpoint system on death, but for me, I kind of like that. It was like that on Tatsujin. It's all about mastering the system. You move back, you redo the level, you perfect it. The game is not only on the Sega Saturn, but it's also on the PS1, so you have no excuses not to play this game. Get a copy, get this game and play it. So we made it to the number 1 slot, and no surprises, it's Radiant Silvergun by Treasure. Now where do I start with this one? Well, it's an absolute masterpiece by Treasure. The basics are done so well, the graphics, the playability, everything that you want and expect from a good shooter is just done to perfection. What makes this so special is the weapon system. So forget about the old classic power up, pick weapons as you go along and overpower your ship, which is very unrealistic if you think about it. Just start off with all the weapons at the beginning as how it should be. And Treasure ain't gonna give you just 1 or 2 different weapon systems. They give you 6 plus the plasma sword, which is effectively like the super bomb. Now this has a superb mechanic because each weapon is so different and each weapon should be used at certain points in the game depending on how you play. Having so many weapons straight off the bat can feel a little bit overwhelming at the beginning, but you will soon get used to it and you will soon play around with the weapons and work out when to use and how you want to play the game. That level of strategy wasn't enough for Treasure. They actually introduced another layer via the chaining mechanics. So here you actually need to shoot enemies of the same color, and if you kill an enemy of a different color you will break the chain and you will get a lower score. So this really adds another layer of challenge if you really want to chase that high score. Unfortunately, a lot of people get put off by the difficulty levels and the complex of the systems that I've just discussed. But don't, just play this game, just jump in, forget about the chaining, just try and play around with the weapons, enjoy the level design, enjoy the playability, and then if you want to, you can start doing the chaining. You can start playing that aspect of the game. It's almost like you have 2 games in one, and that's how I play it too. There's times where I just want to jump in, I want to blast and shoot stuff and get as far as I can. Forget about the chains. And then there's other times I want to go for a high score, and I will play and I'll go more like a puzzle and patterns. And that's the beauty of this game. There's so many ways to play it, and it's just perfection. Well, sorry about that. My crazy Radiant Silver rant is now officially over. I've got to say, you've got to try and play this game. Find a way, if you can get it on the Saturn or if you're just emulation, just try it and give it a bit of time and just play with it. Don't be scared, just play it. So there you have it, me and my STV. Well, that sounded a bit dodgy, didn't it? Me and my Sega STV. It sounds like some sort of gaming edition, doesn't it? My life with the Sega STV. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I know it dragged on for a little bit, so congratulations, you made it to the end. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.